A warm welcome to the program. I'm Felicity Ezewike. So the Alliance of Sahel States, AES, last week summoned Nigeria's top diplomat in Ouagadougou over a single comment from President Bola Tinubu. And that comment was that some of the men behind Nigeria's kidnapping crisis aren't Nigerians at all, and that instability in Mali, Burkina Faso and Niger is making Nigeria's own security problem worse. Burkina Faso's foreign minister called it simplistic and hasty and said it downplayed the sacrifices its country and its neighbors have made fighting the same fire. Now, for context, President Tinubu made that comment while discussing the rescue of 39 schoolchildren and 7 teachers abducted from 3 schools in Oyo State in May, and they were held for 56 days. So, expectedly, the rescue was a moment of national relief, and the president used it to point at a threat he believes is bigger than Nigeria's borders. However, the AES saw something else in that same sentence. A Nigerian president blaming their country for Nigeria's problems without acknowledging that Niger was fighting Boko Haram years before this became a regional story. And that reaction didn't come from nowhere. You see, Nigeria and the AES states haven't trusted each other's judgment on security since 2023, when, after separate coups, all 3 walked out of ECOWAS entirely, taking joint patrols, shared intelligence, and years of cross-border cooperation with them. Now, here's why, here's why it matters beyond diplomacy. As Burkina Faso's foreign minister put it, Nigeria and the AES states are facing the same enemy, yet they cannot agree on how to talk about it, let alone fight it together. So for today's One Slot, we use this row as a starting point for a bigger question. Can a borderless security threat we face ever be defeated by a region whose own governments remain this divided?
You know, you see the problem of insecurity in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger Republic is adding more fuel to our challenges. In fact, that is why we must enhance the capacity of the forest guards as well as create this state police.
Stay with us as we begin this conversation after this break, when we get to introduce our guests. Thank you for staying with us. You're watching One Slot here on News Central. And we have a guest for this conversation. We have quite a number of them, but for now, Shedrack Kunde, International Security Analyst, African Center for International Affairs. He joins us from Accra, Ghana. Thank you very much for being here with us on the program. Why do you think President Tinubu's comment landed so badly with the AES?
It will land very badly with the AES because before even the formation of the AES and the coup debacle, where these coup states face the challenge with ECOWAS and Tinubu being the headliner, threatening military action in Niger, that brought some kind of bad blood between the Tinubu government and the AES. And for the Tinubu government to point fingers at the AES as being responsible for the spillover of heightened terrorism and violent extremist activities in Nigeria, it will come at a bad side for them, because they are also facing the brunt of terrorism and violent extremism. And if you've been following the conversation for a while, you realize that the issues regarding violent extremism has been on the heightened ascendancy in terms of activities, of which these AES states are also trying to run their heads around it. And it will be very difficult for them to swallow such a bitter pill when they are being poked at as the main orchestrators or the main reasons why there have been a heightened activities in terms of terrorism and violent extremism in Nigeria. It will be more of trying to shift the blame to them than trying to look at the bigger issues in which the government ought to deal with.
Is there anger really about the substance of what was said or about the tone and timing of it?
It's a mixture of all of that, because the tone in itself and also the political atmosphere with which it was expressed, it more or less reflected back on why they even left the ECOWAS in the first place. And since they've left the ECOWAS, they find it very difficult for an ECOWAS member state to make such a statement. And all in all, Nigeria is a big power state when it comes to provision of security for the West African sub-region. And if politically such a conversation is coming up, it's quite difficult in the first place. And also, they also have deeper issues regarding terrorism and violent extremism that they are dealing with. And it makes it quite difficult. So when you look at maybe the growing fortification of the ties of terrorism and violent extremism, it's more complicated, it's complex, and it's largely intermingled in structural deficiencies of governance and also some level of multidimensional security paralysis. So these are the bigger issues of looking at the challenges from within. That's a more pragmatic way of trying to look at the issue than trying to point fingers at others who are also facing the same challenge.
All right. Let's welcome Declan Galvin. He joins us for this conversation as well. Declan is the Managing Director, Exigent Risk Advisory. He joins us from Kenya, Nairobi, Kenya. Thank you so much for being here with us. I'll start with the very first question I threw at Shedrack, and that is, why do you think that President Bola Tinubu's comments landed so badly with the AES?
Great, thank you for that very good question. So ultimately, if we look at recent history, the AES states have intentionally distanced themselves from ECOWAS and frankly, much of the kind of international order, while they mainly attempted to consolidate governance around their own financial and social networks. And align themselves mainly with Russia. That approach has obviously not been effective for them, at least in terms of their own counterinsurgency problem, which, if we were to go back in time around 12 months ago, there was a lot of talk about how there wasn't an Islamic terror threat or an insurgency issue in these states. Well, it's abundantly clear that that was always propaganda, and that this is a very, very significant problem, not just for AES states, but for West African states, particularly ECOWAS states in general. And so with Tinubu and the Nigerian government weighing into this situation, it does a couple of things for AES states. A, it kind of embarrasses them, but B, they have obviously within the last 6 months been looking for escape hatches and other kinds of soft landing strategies. One of which is kind of an interesting and growing relationship between the United States and certain AES states. But they ultimately very much need international alliances to both preserve the regime and then also counter these insurgencies. And they really didn't create a lot of avenues for themselves, after they kind of took power. So this is kind of what's going on behind the scenes and why they took such frustration with Tinubu's statements.
All right, we have Austin Aigbe joining in now. He is the Regional Advocacy Officer, West Africa Democracy Solidarity Network. He's also a member of the Situation Room. He joins us from Lagos, Nigeria. A pleasure to welcome you to the program. Thanks for being here. I'll just jump in and ask you about the summoning of the Chargé d'Affaires of Nigeria by the AES. It is a serious diplomatic gesture. Some would say one step below expelling an ambassador. What does that specific action actually signal, and how do you think Abuja should read it?
Well, thank you for having me. Just to say that I'm joining from Abuja.
Oh, okay.
I haven't said that. So you probably had talked about the allegation made by the Nigerian government, and one way to amplify that is in response to those commentaries from the Nigerian authority is to ask the president representative in their own country to come answer certain questions, while the Nigerian government feels that it is the issue of concern in the Sahel state that is giving the Nigerian authority or the Nigerian government sleepless night over insecurity. I think this is not new. You are absolutely right. Just one step before it discharges the ambassador or any of those representative. But I also think that you recall that Nigeria also had issues at a time when our aircraft, Air Force aircraft, had to land in one of the cities in Burkina Faso, and all of these crises of security concern also began to erupt until some diplomatic mission had to go to the country and eventually resolve after all of the due process that the Burkinabe government had done to be able to, leading to the release of those military officers and of course some civilians on board. So I think it is important before making such allegation, the Nigerian government should have had a lot of evidence at its disposal. Nigeria may not be talking to Burkina Faso by that commentary. It may be talking to Mali or to Niger, specifically to Mali. It's on record that Mali has been faced with an insurgency group in the last couple of weeks, months, and almost leading to the fall of the Nigerian government. That only Bamako is arguably, at some point, I don't know the clear report as of today or as of this moment, at some point, only Bamako was in the periphery, standing alone. Other areas, whether it was the particular of the northern side of Mali, I'm not talking about the other part, the side leading to Senegal, that the southern side, but more of the northern side. So that alone had informed countries having borders or close borders with Niger having some heavy concern. And Burkina Faso and Niger being the closest does work with the Malian government. So they wouldn't say that. But of course, what's happening in Mali is something that needed more support from regional actors rather than trading blame, especially when Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso are no longer in the ECOWAS family, so to say.
I think I'll stay with you when I ask this. The AES pointed out something that Niger was fighting Boko Haram before Mali or Burkina Faso faced large-scale terrorism. Is that historically accurate? And does Nigeria's government give the Sahel enough credit for the sacrifices they've already made?
So, if it hadn't been for the break in relationship, by now, what is happening in Mali probably would not have happened. And the influx of this militia group heading towards like dominating the Sahel. Of course, Nigeria is part having its own share of security challenge from the Sahel. And if these countries were together, under the ECOWAS bloc, when there was a standby force actually working with these three countries, within the Sahel country, it probably would have benefited all of the countries again together. But having each one now having to work on their own, work on themselves, even though the Sahel state has deployed about 5,000 strong personnel to deal with insurgency, but rather than address insurgency effectively, it has probably increased in the Sahel state. With the data just shown on the screen, does show that the Sahel has the largest, particularly Burkina Faso, from the Stockholm report and all the reports available, global terrorism, the Sahel, particularly Burkina Faso, has the domain of militia group. And again, all of the countries, i.e. Nigeria, strategically located, and because of the Boko Haram concern and other militia groups are growing in country, and of course not running away from the issue of resource exploration, which has become also a security concern in Nigeria. And I think very strongly that the relationship would have been better, and it would have been better addressing the insurgency group if for the fragmentation of this state. Now ECOWAS standby force is not able to work with the Sahel standby force, and of course the agreement between Nigeria and Niger hasn't really been effective. Today we have the Minister of Defense, who was then the Chief of Defense Staff when the agreement was reached with Niger, but that for me has not taken a route downward effectively.
All right, let me come back to you, Declan, before I come back to Shedrack. Is there, in your view, any real evidence that fighters or networks crossing from Mali, Burkina Faso, or Niger are driving Nigeria's kidnapping crisis? Or is the president oversimplifying a mostly, some would argue, homegrown problem?
So I think that by and large, almost entirely, Nigeria's kidnapping crisis is homegrown. To be sure, there will be some kind of foreign actors involved, particularly in some border states, but that would be a very small part of what is an enormous and ongoing crisis in Nigeria around kidnappings. Naturally, the president is looking to do two things. He wants to deflect inadequacies of the Nigerian government, which is, I would also say, been going on for successive regimes in managing and eliminating this crisis, as well as attempting to tether this crisis to foreign actors in order to kind of bolster Nigeria's regional diplomatic efforts around counterinsurgency and peace building.
Okay, Shedrack, there are documents that shows links between Lakurawa in Nigeria's northwest and fighters or support from JNIM in the Sahel. So was Tinubu's underlying point that Nigeria's crisis was a genuine cross-border dimension actually correct, even if the delivery, the argument would be, was clumsy?
Please, I need to adjust your frame. I need to see from...
Shedrack, please go ahead. That's a little bit of a technical glitch there.
Great. So looking at how terrorist organizations or terrorist networks operate, because of the porous nature of borders within the West African sub-regions, they do transverse between different border regions. And as a result, we do have the operations of different or of the same terrorist network in different parts of different countries. So if you take an example, the Liptako-Goma region. The Liptako-Goma region is between Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso. This is a hotbed of terrorism globally. Similarly, when you look at the Lake Chad Basin transversing between Cameroon, Nigeria, and Chad, that's also a hotbed for terrorism. So terrorism do thrive on within border areas, and they can crisscross. So saying it as it is more of a truism than trying to address a bigger issue or a bigger challenge with regards to trying to point fingers as to whether is as a result of the AES or being part of ECOWAS, or the departure of the AES from ECOWAS has been some form of motivating factor. The underlying issue is that is how these terrorist organizations work. These terrorist networks, that is how they operate. So if you are just trying to re-emphasize their modus operandi, then fine. But trying to point fingers as factors leading to such mobility of terrorist organizations from Niger into some parts of Nigeria, it's a non-starter in my point of view.
Okay, I think we should go back a bit in history and see how this relationship totally seemed to have deteriorated to this stage. We all know that the coup has a part in it, but others argued it's not the whole thing. They only exited ECOWAS in January of 2025, even though they've always threatened that they would. Now, the junta say that ECOWAS failed them on security and punished their people with sanctions. Do you think that's where the splinter really happened, or there is more to this? The question should be to you, Austin.
You see,
Austin, can you hear me, please?
I can hear you clearly. Can you hear me?
Okay, yes, I can. Go ahead. Okay.
So you're looking at the historical context. So ECOWAS had issues with the Sahel States. They believe that ECOWAS is working with the unknown enemy, which is France, the Franc-Afrique conversation, and that because ECOWAS is close to France, and of course the Nigerian president, as at that time, was the chair of ECOWAS, and it does have strong relationship with Emmanuel Macron, and of course France, there is the threat. ECOWAS has become a threat to the Sahel nation. And with the sanction, particularly targeting Niger, as at that time, it became an injury to one and an injury to all. So it was Niger. There was no direct sanction in Mali and Burkina Faso. It was Niger's sanction that erupted the call for the Sahel state, and of course, the conversation that eventually led to the three countries pulling out from from ECOWAS, the ECOWAS bloc. It has nothing to do with whether it is basically an ECOWAS problem. No, it was not, because ECOWAS had told them, had given them a timeline to return. For instance, we know that by now Mali should have returned to democracy. By the agreement reached with ECOWAS, there were conversations that were supposed to lead up to a gradual process. The same conversation is happening with the Guinea-Bissau military administration. The same happening with Guinea, with General Dumai, and today Guinea is back to democracy, or civil rule, as you may want to call it. So I truly think that it was a crisis between the former colony and his colonial master that erupted all of this crisis. And the game in all of this conversation was a crisis between France and these Sahel states. There's nothing more. And of course, Nigeria and etc., we have to bear the burden of that extended, will I say, an extension of accusation, so to say. And you also recall that the Sahel state has taken hold of Russia and has literally even asked the UN peace mission in those countries to leave. Even though I know that the last time I checked, there was still Italy in those countries providing support. If you were driving European countries out, you were driving the UN out, why do you have to maintain some other countries in your territory? It doesn't really add up. And I think that what is happening is a war against France is an extension to what is affecting Nigeria and, of course, ECOWAS.
All right. I understand we have Roland Stockton joining us now. He's the Regional Director, Trans Intelligence and AMP Security Solutions Limited. He joins us from Amsterdam, Netherlands. Thank you very much, Roland, for joining in. Before we put our first question to you, we'll take a short break. When we come back, we will continue. Glad you're still with us. You're watching One Slot here on News Central. We have our guest still standing by. Just to say, we're looking at the broader issue coming off the diplomatic dispute between the AES and Nigeria president's comment. We're looking at, can West Africa defeat a borderless security threat while its government remain politically divided? But at the heart of this was the comments made by President Bola Tinubu. Roland, let's establish your position with the reaction to the comments made by President Bola Tinubu. In your view, is it an overreaction or in context based on the relationship so far?
Politics. It's politics. Both the AES and the president of Nigeria, political aspect, of course, is behind everything. And with elections and things coming up, they're trying to take center stage. And always, if you have internal issues, you try to find an external enemy to attack, to divert attention. So in this particular case, the politics are coming in, and also, of course, there's no evidence to suggest that the claims he is making, they are assumptions. There's no evidence from captured terrorists or interrogations or whatever. So in a way, the Nigerian point of view is correct, and the AES point of view is correct, whilst at the same time being opposed, and both sides are playing this tit-for-tat game, the spat, to try and come across as more politically astute, and we're in charge, and so on and so forth. And I think in some cases it's trying to muddy the waters. It's smoke and mirrors.
Indeed. Before you joined in, we were looking at the split, what cost it for the AES to move, and perhaps understanding this will help us establish some way forward in reconnecting the region so we can fight this terrorism as a whole. Shadrach, I'll come to you. Since that split, how has the loss of shared intelligence and joint patrols actually changed things along Nigeria's northern borders?
So, because of the transnational nature of terrorists across the Lake Chad Basin, of which Niger also share a common border with Nigeria, it has become some form of more of trying to look at the belt up of Niger, where most terrorist activities do take place. Trying to look at intelligence sharing and intelligence gathering, the broader scheme of things, it will be very difficult for both governments to be able to communicate unless they do have some form of agreement, indeed, to be able to do that. If not, it makes it very ripe for terrorist activities to take place on both borders, where an activity will take place in the Nigerian border and they can be able to go into the Nigerian border, of which the Nigerian intelligence organizations cannot be able to infiltrate or cannot be able to go in. And with law enforcement networks or actors. So if you have military activity in northern part of Nigeria, and it happens that these terrorist organizations do bolt into Niger, it becomes very difficult for the Nigerian armed forces to be able to intervene at the other side of the border. And beyond that, since there is some kind of a rupture in terms of relations between Niger, the junta and the Nigerian government, they will want not to have any form of intelligence sharing agreements or intelligence sharing arrangements with the Nigerian government. And it becomes very difficult. And I think it can be a cause of an increased attack. But when you look at it from the whole West African sub-region, there has been a big vacuum when it comes to trying to contain the activities of terrorist actors because of the abrupt withdrawal of around 16,000 troops out of the Sahel. It makes it very challenging for the region to balance, and it gives these terrorist networks or groups the room to be able to operate freely with the vacuum that has been created so far.
Okay, I'm looking at time now, and I realize we don't have so much to expand further towards this line of the conversation. So I'll just skip forward and look at the solution part of the conversation. Austin, Nigeria's defense minister publicly called for ECOWAS and the AES to build a unified security front during his recent visit to Cotonou. Is that realistic or just a diplomatic language with no follow-through?
Fantastic way to look at it. However, you recall too, when the defense minister was the chief of defense staff, which means when he was heading the active military officers before his retirement, and then he was appointed as a political leader now in charge of defense, he led the mission to Niger to sign up a deal for military cooperation, understanding that our closest ally in this border issue is Niger. And Nigeria does have over 1,000, it's almost like 1,400 porous borders stretching from Niger up to Cameroon and all of that, most porous. And you recall in history that there have been times when Boko Haram had to flare up over to Cameroon on the other side, and the Nigerian government cannot move on the other side because of cooperation that doesn't exist. And for Nigerian soldiers, Nigerian military, to properly move into the other territory, in this case, not ECOWAS territory, it is now a Sahel territory, or Alliance of Sahel States. They need to build up that alliance. That's why I told you earlier that alliance hadn't quite worked well. And with this political commentary from the Nigerian authority, it, in quote, freezes that intention to even cooperate. The minister's comment recently added up to that previous move he has made. But I think, too, that I support his argument. So even if we are not cooperating politically, can we cooperate military-wise? Can we cooperate in dealing with the greatest challenge, which has become the wicked problem in the Sahel state? It is security concern. Okay. Now, I'm not sure people will be talking about development in Mali, or even though we hear a bit of what's coming from Burkina Faso, arguably most of those commentaries coming from Burkina Faso are what I classify as filming. They are all foreign interference, information manipulation, to make it look as if things are going well in this part of the Sahel state, whereas we undermine the security concern. Security concern is the greatest problem today in the Sahel. We can cooperate around it.
All right, Declan, I apologize. I actually wanted to come to you first before I went to Austin, but it's still very valid. How much does the growing role of Russian-linked, is it Declan now or Roland that I was supposed to come to? But Austin, let's just stay with you. Declan, I beg your pardon. Let's just stay with you. How much does the growing role of Russian-linked military contractors in the Sahel complicates perhaps a future cooperation between ECOWAS and a Western-aligned Nigeria?
So, look, I think that we need to look at it through a couple of different lenses and different kind of either operational tempos or intensity. I think that if we look at the regional insecurity and the threat from Islamic terrorism right now within AES states, it's just something that's too acute to ignore, and so there needs to be some sort of multilateral security operation, which probably for the foreseeable future involves partnership with AES heads of state, given that they do have kind of the most legitimacy presently within the region. And you know, Nigeria has historically served that role along with some other ECOWAS states fairly well, certainly compared to other parts of the continent. So that at a minimum is going to be needed to kind of unlock this problem. Now, with regard to Russian forces and Russian mercenary forces in the area, they are an exacerbating, not a mitigating factor within the overall security situation. You know, they're not there for good governance or state building. They're not there to help secure these countries any more than you know, what will provide them preferential access to a lot of the mineral and metal wealth. But you know, short of them leaving, the problem around them and the problem within AES states still needs to be dealt with. And so in many ways, I think that they need to be a secondary layer of concern, even though, you know, in any other circumstance, I think that we would probably approach it with a very different lens.
All right, Roland, the AES has already built its own 5,000 troop joint force. And then we also know that the ECOWAS is separately building its own counter-terrorism brigade. Practically speaking, can two rival regional forces really operate side by side without conflict or duplication?
There's no reason why they can't, apart from personalities and hidden agendas. If you look at some examples from around the world, if you take USA and Mexico, a shared border, and they, to some degree, cooperate. If you look at other areas where there's issues, my own country, the United Kingdom, and the Irish Republic, we did have some differences in the past. But when it came to the patrolling of that border, there was mirror patrols on either side. So what you really need is that they talk to each other, and they are working with the same radio nets, the same training. If one says, you know, we're going to be patrolling from A to B to C to D, then the other one says, well, we'll be patrolling from A to B to C to D on the other side, or we will have forces in situ. So if something untoward happens, we can assist. The other thing so joint training and so on and so forth, I agree with Declan. As we can see from the Ukraine, the Russian military are a joke. I've been to Russian military sites, are pathetic, okay? And they are only there for purely mercenary reasons, mineral and whatever they can take. Russians are basically neo-colonialists, you know, and this is a lesson that we all know is a recipe for disaster. Coupled with the fact, of course, that the borders were never created by the African people. They were imposed upon the African people. It's 19th century furniture, the borders, trying to adopt to a 21st century problem. The Russians are a problem, and this incompatibility between the two groups is the biggest problem, and it is the greatest weapon you can give the terrorists is this animosity. They will exploit it. No reason at all why the two militaries can't work together. They need to be given the go-ahead to do so. And to some degree, we used to call it hot pursuit when I was in the military, where if there is a terrorist attack and you're going after them, pursuing them, you're allowed to go so far over the border to capture the terrorists, for example. But this has to be done at a political level first, and this is the stumbling block, not the military. Military people normally get on quite well. They have a similar mindset, so on and so forth. Politicians are the one who play Machiavellian games.
Yeah, as we were talking, I was reflecting back on the introduction we presented that the coup led to a split. We no longer have joint patrols, shared intelligence, and things like that. So, Shedrack, I want to ask, is there a scenario Or what would it take, really, to bring back perhaps joint patrols, sharing of intelligence, and maybe cross-border cooperation in this fight against terrorism?
It will take a greater dialogue for a collective West African security partnership beyond just ECOWAS AES divide against terrorism and violent extremism. And key states within the ECOWAS regions, including the likes of Senegal and Ghana, can be able to lead the front in trying to negotiate the differences beyond just AES ECOWAS, in the sense that terrorism ought to be looked at as a collective threat to the national security and also the individual human security of nations. And as a result, that should be the first conversation when it comes to solutions. There should be greater dialogue for collective understanding, and such understanding should just transverse between or above this AES ECOWAS divide, and there should be some level of a coordinated counter-terrorism partnership with the mindset that terrorism, violent extremism do not know ECOWAS member states. It does not know AES member states. It knows individuals. It knows countries. It threatens political independence. It threatens territorial integrity. And there should be some level of locally led peace-building mechanisms in all of these conversations to promote good governance and enhance regional and also cross-border cooperation amongst these countries. Without this, I think the conversation will be as it is at the moment.
All right, gentlemen, it's been a pleasure talking with you. I wish we had more time, but we need to cross over to a live event. So I want to say thank you very much, Declan, Austin, Roland, and Shadrach for obliging us on one slot.